Welcome to Escapes with Nigel. I'm Nigel Napier-Andrews, and today we're in Kleinburg, Ontario, a pretty village which is home to many Canadian icons. But the highlight of any trip to Kleinburg is a visit to the McMichael Canadian Art Collection, home to the iconic Group of Seven. It also houses touring exhibits of some of the country's best artists. The McMichael is nestled in the forest, and you pass the silent gaze of statues in the collection's sculpture garden along the drive to the exhibits. Joining me in the gallery is Dr. Victoria Dickinson, Executive Director and CEO of the McMichael. What was one of the challenges that you found when you first came to the McMichael?
Ooh, challenges. Well, I think the McMichael is such an iconic institution, so I think it's learning how to manage an icon.
Right.
So many people come here and have come here for years and seen it as, in a sense, the cradle of Canadian art, particularly for the Group of Seven.
Right.
So that I think when my arrival here was thinking to steward this relationship that the McMichael has with Canadians and with tourists as well, to be the place in which they come to see a particular kind of Canadian art was for me a big challenge. Like, how do we balance that with, in effect, having new things, having exciting things for our returning public? So that's been a great challenge.
It's quite overwhelming to stand in the gallery with so many beautiful works of art around us. It's stunning.
It is, isn't it?
I mean, what a wonderful job you have, just living with all of these wonderful works every day.
Always wonderful to walk by them.
Now, none of this would be here if it wasn't for the McMichaels.
The McMichaels basically built a house here on a property they acquired at Kleinburg. It was called Tapawingo, Place of Joy. And they started to fill it not only with pine furniture and elements of Canadiana, but also with painting. They were very excited by the works of the group. And so they filled their home with the paintings. They got acquainted with artists like A.Y. Jackson, and they actually began to open their home to people on the weekends, people to come in, children, school groups during the week, and people on the weekend. And we've got wonderful photos of a Saturday at the McMichaels, and there's their living room furniture, there are the paintings on the walls, and there are people just coming in and wandering through their homes, sort of like one of the great houses of Europe, you know? I mean, but they lived here until in 1966. They actually signed over the property and the collection to the province.
They only collected Canadian painters then?
Canadian painters and Aboriginal artists in Canada. And that's very interesting because when the McMichaels began to collect Inuit art and the works of Aboriginal painters like Norval Morrisseau, very few institutions were collecting this kind of work as art. And so the McMichaels were pioneers in that. And currently a third of the collection here, the third of the permanent collection, is by Aboriginal artists. Victoria,
tell me a little bit about Tom Thompson, who preceded the Group of Seven.
Well, Thompson was this sort of force of nature, really. He was a self-taught painter. He grew up around the Owen Sound area, and he was this archetypal Canadian. He was, you know, he wore the toque, he canoed, he could fish, he could light a campfire, he slept in tents. And he was an inspiration for many members of what became the Group of Seven, because he had this knowledge both of the, as an outdoorsman, of the Canadian wilderness. He was very much at home there, but at the same time he could paint. So he was an inspiration, and particularly you see in Harris, Lauren Harris and MacDonald, that after his very tragic death in 1917, Harris and MacDonald, they talk about him as this sort of driving force to discover a new way to think about Canada and to paint it. Though he was not an official member of the Group of Seven, he was certainly part of its inspiration and there at its founding.
Now, tell me a little bit about Lauren Harris, who really was the sort of driving force, certainly financially, behind the Group of Seven.
Well, he was the heir to the Massey Harris fortune, so of course the tractors.
Right.
And he himself was a trained artist. He'd gone to Germany. He was in Germany for 4 years. He was trained in European techniques, but he came back to Canada with both his professional training, but also this acquaintance with Thompson and a true love of the Canadian landscape. One of the things he did was he built a studio building. He felt that the artist needed a place to paint. So in Rosedale, in Toronto, he built what was called the Studio Building, and he rented studios to the artist. Thompson he couldn't afford a studio in the building, so he rented a shack at the bottom of the garden. And we have this shack on the site of the McMichael. The McMichaels, when the shack was sort of falling down and becoming, it's a wooden building, becoming a little decrepit, they actually moved it here to the property. And so it was reinstalled in Kleinburg here at the McMichael. So Harris was instrumental with making a space for Canadian painters to work in, and also later he even fitted out a rail car, and he took painters with him up to Algoma on the Algoma Central Railway. So definitely someone who was not only trained as a professional artist, inspiration, and a focus as an artist, but also a bit of a, what they call, I guess in French, a mécène, someone who was the philanthropist behind the group.
We always call it the group of 7, but in fact there were several more painters in it. Tell me
There were
about
10.
Okay,
so the people came in and out of it. Some people were there for a year and then left. Other people came into it. So, but the group of 7 had their first show in 1920 as the group of 7.
Yes.
So the membership changed, but the name remained.
And attached to this group of men, there was one woman.
Well, Lauren Harris was very much a mentor to Emily Carr, and he really encouraged Emily Carr's painting. And she, of course, was painting many of the same themes, but in a very different place. Whereas many of the group were painting here in Algonquin, Algoma, the near north of Ontario. Carr herself was really focusing on the northwest coast and painting in British Columbia, but bringing many of the same ideas around understanding how to paint this new landscape and how to paint it in a exciting, I want to say moving and flowing way, but when you see her work, you can feel the wind in the trees. And I think that's what a lot of these artists were. They were giving us not simply a kind of static view of nature, but a lively, energetic, overwhelming natural world. And that's what Carr was doing as well.
Here we are in this abundance of brilliant art, but you must have a favorite somewhere tucked away. Which one is it?
Well, I love the oil sketches of the group of 7, and they're quite unique to this period in Canadian painting. In Europe, many people went out and they would do a pencil sketch or a watercolor, and they'd take it to the studio and they would work it up. But because the members of the group had access not only to pre-prepared panels that they could take with them, but also oil paints in tubes, they were actually able to go out en plein air into the wilderness and paint these small oil sketches. And there's something so fresh about them, so immediate. And this one I love because this is a J.H. MacDonald sketch, but it's called Beaver Dam and Birches. And to me, it's very Canadian, the essence of, you know, that experience in the woods. Here's the beaver dam, the still pond reflecting the birches. It's fall, the leaves have mostly fallen, there's the light coming through. One can imagine being in this place. And I think for many of us who've spent some time out in the northern woods, these kinds of scenes are so evocative. They take you right back to that place. And when I was speaking about the panels that they used, it's really exciting to know that in the collection we also have the painting boxes. So this is the MacDonald's painting box. He would have put his panels in this box. He would have had his paints in here, his palette, his brushes, and you may not be able to see it very well, but we have a photo of him, painting box over his shoulder, striding out into the forest, looking for a scene to paint.
My goodness, what an incredible exhibition this is, a marvelous array of still lifes. And tell me a little bit about this exhibition.
Well, this is an exhibition entitled simply Mary Pratt, and it's a 50-year retrospective of the artist's work. It contains around 60 works from public and private collections, and it's one of the series of temporary special exhibitions that the McMichael hosts every year. So this is an extraordinary tribute to Mary, because she is one of Canada's leading still life realist artists, but also I think she's an inspiration, particularly to many women who find in the subject matter of her work so much that speaks to the work of women in the home, the family, and the daily life that we share.
It would be realistic to say that you could actually reach out and touch these paintings and eat the food.
Well,
it's so realistic. It's
we don't want you
amazing.
to touch them, but
no touching. All right, so
no
we won't touch anything, but we might eat it.
But they do look
in our
good.
minds.
They do look good enough to eat. And I think what Mary says is that as she was going about her daily life, what she realized is how much beauty there was. So not just delicious taste, but this visual beauty within the very elements of the food she was preparing. So there's everything here from a few raspberries on a glass plate to a roast to the fish before it's cooked on a piece of paper. And I think what's also amazing, and it really shows well in these works, is her ability to capture the play of light on materials, whether it's tin foil, glass, saran wrap, a silver platter. It's amazing.
This exhibition itself has been in Newfoundland, I think, or in...
It opened at the Rooms,
yes.
I think it was last spring, and it's been touring. It's been to Windsor, Ontario. It's at the McMichael. It will go to Regina and then end its tour in Halifax at the Art Gallery of Nova Scotia.
So if people miss it here, there are other opportunities to see it.
But we hope they'll come and see it here.
Of course. Dr. Victoria Dickinson, thank you so much for showing us around McMichael Canadian Art Collection today.
It's been my pleasure.
Just across the road, there's an old church, future home to another Canadian icon. Let's go and take a look. The wooded valley stretched off below us for miles, with the tinsel sparkle of the river winking through. On the far ridge we could see a single barn, nothing more. The setting was magnificent, the sunset golden, the stillness all-pervading. We sat there drinking in the view, seduced by the absolute calm. Suddenly I spoke. "I think we should buy it," I said, just like that. I'm reading from Pierre Berton's autobiography about how he came to live in Kleinburg. And this lovely church has been donated to be the future home of the Pierre Berton Discovery Centre. And right now I'm waiting for a special guest, Peter Berton, Pierre Berton's son. Peter, how nice to see you.
Good
Thank
to see
you
you
so
too,
much
Nigel.
for coming.
Yeah, great to see you.
Why don't we sit down, make ourselves comfortable, and tell me about this wonderful church we're in.
Well, this church was built in 1928 in the village of Kleinburg, where my parents lived for 63 years. Church is interesting to our family because most of the children were christened in this church. So I remember that we had Sunday school downstairs and our scout troop was downstairs. So this building has a lot of meaning to us, as it does to a lot of the people of Kleinburg.
This is where the Discovery Centre will be in the future. Tell me what we can expect.
The idea of the Discovery Centre is for it to be a very short experience. You come in and you might be here for an hour or so to experience just a taste of some of the stories my father told. We would like to keep those things going, those legends alive, and to educate new Canadians and young people about how not only immigrants built the country, but Canadians and everyone built the country, including our First Nations people, and how to tell a single story at once. So it's not going to be a big center. It's only, you'd come in and it'd be an hour experience, and you would maybe learn about the Klondike Gold Rush, and you'd get a taste of it. If you wanted to learn more, you could go research more or read more about it. It might be about one of the wars that Canada participated in. It might be about the opening of the North, or it might be just about one person and a personality in Canadian history. It might be about the contribution of immigrants to Canada, and it would also have an online component, so you could see it online as well and interact with it. There's also a component for The Secret World of Og, which is his children's book that he wrote to attract younger kids as well, and to get that story, illustrate that story as well and get a taste of that. So the idea is to bring Canadian history alive the way he did in his writings and his TV shows, and to continue doing that.
Perhaps this generation doesn't know who Pierre Berton was as much as our generation did. Tell me a little bit about him.
Well, I think my father was one of the people, the very first people to champion the cause of Canadian history and how exciting and interesting it is. All the characters, the people, the places, the things that happened. He was excited about making Canadians proud of their history, and like the Americans do. He talked about how Americans have legends like Johnny Appleseed to Davy Crockett, and made all these people really part of the American psyche and part of their history, and he was trying to say we have just as many more, if not more, interesting people in Canada, starting with Van Horn and the people who built the railway, from the guys who discovered gold in the Klondike. And all of these stories are fascinating, and he did his best to bring these stories to life for Canadians, both with you in Heritage Theatre and with his books, and with My Country, his TV show. He was on Front Page Challenge. He was on television for more than 50 years.
This book, The National Dream, was the most popular book he wrote.
Yeah.
You remember this well, I'm sure.
Well, he wrote this book in 1970. He was 50 years old, and he was very proud of the fact that he'd done some of his best work post being 50. And he took the summer off. He said to everybody, including his producers and everybody else, that he was going to Mexico for the summer to write a book. He turned off the telephones here in Kleinburg at his home and at our house, and he didn't go anywhere. He just stayed home, and he wrote the book, and he wrote it in about 30 days. It was a big story, and the follow-up book is The Last Spike, which did almost as well. So, and then he went on to write a whole series of other books about Canadian history, another 20 or so since then, which are all about various aspects of Canadian history and the people, mostly about the people and the places.
So we have a wonderful collection of artifacts here. Let's go and have a look. Boy, these must bring back some memories, Peter.
Yeah, they do. This hat here is my father's hat that he wore as his costume at the Binder Twine Festival. Mm-hmm. And he had a gray top coat. He looked like he was dressed in the 1860s style. Top coat, a string tie, ruffled shirt, and this hat. And he had several costumes for the Binder Twine because he was a very popular thing for people to get dressed up and pretend they were in the old days for the Binder Twine Festival here in Kleinburg.
Mm-hmm. Now there's a lot of spikes. I can imagine that because he had his book, The Last Spike.
He got dozens of these sent to him over the years, especially after he finished the book and the TV show. People sent him dozens of these. There's all kinds of them on plaques and everything. They've made a little man out of this one. There were bottle openers, and there were spikes for every kind of implement you could have. And then this antique one, originally one with a certificate there that's saying it's one of the an ancient spike. Some of these are just new ones, I think. The Screen Gems reel there, that was celebrating his 1000th TV show for the Pierre Berton show, which concluded in 1972, and I think this is about 1969.
1969, yes.
He did a total of 1,700 of those shows, and there were interviews with famous people like Lenny Bruce and Malcolm X and prime ministers and presidents and everything, so it was very interesting. He has the Order of Canada. He was a companion of the Order of Canada, which we've also donated to the city of Vaughan.
Well, I've got some photographs here, Peter, and I'd love to show them to you. The first thing I'll show you is this picture of your dad wearing this jacket.
Yeah, this jacket was made for him by Linda Lundstrom, and he wore it all the time, and he really liked it. And I believe you acquired it somehow.
I did indeed.
Yeah.
And here's another picture of your dad wearing it at one of the...
This is at one of the fundraiser dinners for
Right.
the Burton House in Dawson, which is a writer's retreat.
Right.
And he was toasting someone here, I believe. But this is the year he died.
And it was the year after that this jacket was auctioned. And I happened to have come into a little bit of money, but I bought this jacket as a fundraiser.
Yeah.
But anyway, I thought that as we are building this great archive to your dad's memory, and as I knew him so well and was extraordinarily fond of him, that I should now pass the ownership of this jacket over to you and donate it to the Pierre Berton for the Pierre Berton Discovery Centre.
Well, thank you very much. That's very generous of you. And I know that the Discovery Centre will be very pleased to have this. Thank you very much.
So there you have it. We've been in Kleinburg, Ontario, visiting some true Canadian icons. For more information, please visit their websites. And don't forget to check out my website for more information and all sorts of extras about the show. We'll see you next time on Escapes with Nigel.